This is Beard Banter, episode 24. I have Eric Taylor with Barricade Cyber Solutions. I wanted to, before we get going, talk a second because we have a charity event that I'm doing, and it's shaving my beard along with 13 other gentlemen, and that count has actually grown. I might be short on that. At November at IT Nation Connect. And the charity is focusing on giving increments of $10,000 to five different charities, hopefully twice, for a grand total of $100,000. And I bring all this up not to be pandering and ask you to donate. Please donate. Pandering. But also to say, Eric Taylor has been gracious enough. He has donated $15,000. It's dedicated to Hackers for Vets, which is a organization that is taking recent transitioning veterans, as long as they have their DD-214 and it was an honorable discharge, and giving them monetary assistance. And it's not really with a lot of strings, and it's a lot of these trying to help advance their career towards cybersecurity and give them an exit plan and an exit strategy. And so it was a fantastic charity, and I just want to say, Eric, thank you. Your benevolence is not missed, and it's extremely awesome to me. So thank you. Do you mind taking a second, introducing yourself, and maybe take just a second and say why you chose to donate in the grandiose fashion you did, brother?
So yeah, Eric Taylor, CEO and Chief Digital Forensics Expert here at Barricade Cyber Solutions, based out of Charleston, South Carolina. Um, I really did it because I'm a vet myself. 4.5 years in the United States Marine Corps, worked in ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, and I knew you were doing the beard banter and things of that, or the shave of the beard of IT Nation and stuff, um, and then I seen the Hackers for Vets on there, and I'm like, I started digging into it. I'm like, this is pretty cool because I know what I did gave me a path to do other things on the private sector.
Sure.
A lot of folks don't have that, right? So if there was a way that I could help pay it forward, if you will, for other veterans, not just Marines, but other veterans that are coming out looking for a place to call home, maybe their MOS that was in the military is not really readily accessible on the private
Especially like
sector.
combat
Yeah,
MOSs are specific there, right? They come out
yeah,
with almost no direct hireable skill that translates one to one, and I think that's a real tough area that gets focused on by this program. So
yeah.
that's awesome.
So I mean, except for like police force or the police department or
Fair private
SWAT,
security.
private
Yeah,
security,
yeah,
things of that nature. But you know, not to get political, but with the current landscape of what's going on in America, who really wants to put them and their families through that garbage?
sure.
That's got to be a terrible feeling, not knowing if you're going to come home that day.
Yeah, 100%.
So
And it's our way of giving back for those things, regardless of the political sphere you fall in, right? So love it. Thank you very much. And, we're going to come and bring you a giant check and make a big video and such. But I'll promise not to bring, this with me. I don't know if you saw my get up. I was kind of showing you this before the show, but
yeah.
I will promise not to bring this particular device unless we're going to play together, I suppose. But thank you for your
Could
donation.
you
So,
imagine? Could you
oh,
imagine us at one spot?
Oh, it's not good, especially because I was at a restaurant the other day, and I talked to you about this the other day. But they had those QR codes, like everybody. You've
Mhm.
seen my videos on QR codes and my thoughts on them in general. But in the QR codes, they had NFC tags. Tap to get our menu and payment
Oh my
system.
God.
And would you believe that
Oh
they were
yeah.
not read only? So they had writable components to where you could actually replace that with your own QR web address and be a man in the middle or whatever. But, this is a very cybersecurity focused episode because I am with a cybersecurity practititioner and one that I've seen your own career grow. Over the 2 or 3 years that I've known you, right? I mean, you've always
Mhm.
kind of had a dabbling set of skills. You've always, been kind of in that red team and experimental and playing kind of world, just like I have. But for everybody's edification, kind of talk about where you came from, because you were an MSP, predominantly doing the same work we all have done over the years, with hopefully more of a secure focus. But you've transitioned now. Help me understand that journey. Like where were you, and what drove you this way?
So this really goes back to the days of when we had street lights on. And that's how we knew to come home, right? Street lights came on, you went home.
Oh yeah,
So
fair. That's a minute
wait,
ago. That was on the
yeah,
bicycle, bro.
yeah,
Beginning of
man.
Stranger Things, as I understand it. But
Only those who know not to drink from the garden hose as soon as the water turns on because it will scold you.
bro, 100%.
No.
Yeah, my kids
So
won't know that one. They'll just
no,
get burnt.
Yeah.
No, but anyways,
but
so you've been playing around
but
in. Go ahead,
yeah,
continue.
so I started off as red team. I started off as a hacker.
Yeah,
And when a local school, our high school was split into two different campuses locally. I won't give the name of the school because they will probably, really not like me because the way things turned out when I was at that school. Um, but you know, that was back in the DOS 3.1, 3.11 days. Windows 95 or Windows NT or Windows 3.1, 3.0 or 3.1 was really starting to, take off. You had 1,000 freaking disks you had to use just to install the darn thing. So,
yep,
right, the whole 56K modem, pressing the turbo button on your tower to get, your
yeah.
front
We
side
get the
bus.
time frame, I
Yeah,
think, in
exactly.
this
Okay, here we go.
context, right? So
Sorry,
Packard
ADHD
Bell.
moment. I'll go on.
Yeah, it's okay.
Um,
Packard Bell would have been another delineator, right? Like, anyways, but yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
well, Gateway was cool, but anyway.
Yeah,
So I found a way to not only hack into, of course, school, which you always hear the telltale
sure.
sign and shit.
Usually low hanging fruit, but sure.
Mostly the way that they structured the school, for your junior and sophomore year at this campus, they had a bunch of individual buildings, and supposedly they were not networked together.
Okay,
I found a way to go into. They had an actual other VLAN for the management. So I took from computer lab I was in, bored as crap, found how to get into the other VLAN, into the management interface, and started
sure.
getting into all the networks. And I
So
wasn't
you've
really.
proven your network or exploration methodologies, right, to find the other
Mhm.
subnets, and then vulnerability attacks there. But let's fast forward into from MSP, right, where you were serving the community at
Well, yeah,
that
we can get
time.
there.
Were
So,
you? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, just to get to, you know, I got busted for hacking into Pizza Hut, hacking into NAS.
NPI.
It,
Yeah.
because they had a dial-up system in their back of their office, so I hacked into my local Pizza Hut that I was working at. Because why not? Um, Hacked into NASA. I did enough stuff that at 2 o'clock in the morning, the FBI raided the house that I was living at with my mom.
So you had poor OPSEC too,
Yeah, I didn't know how to cover
as a
my
kid,
tracks
right?
very well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, when I was going through this whole journey and, they actually took time to have to rearrange my schedule to find a computer that was not connected to a network through the rest of my high school. There was another school that was in the area that was like, trying to advance me. It's like, come over here and we'll do it. So, I played in a red world a lot of times. So I didn't want to get in trouble anymore. So that's when I went to blue teaming after I got out of the Marine Corps and after I got out away from black box and on my own. I wanted to be blue team, and that's when MSP was really taking off. That's how I became into there because I really wanted to keep my freedom. So that's how that transition all came in. So I was an MSP probably for about 10 years. And in the back of my mind, I'm always, I mean, you've seen it. I'm always urging, like, what can I exploit? What can I do without
Yeah.
getting into too much trouble and essentially going to prison for it? So it was definitely a journey of tiptoeing into bug bounty. Can I stop myself before you go too far?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I saw some of like early on in some of your things, just as a personal note, you're always trying to assess the capabilities of others. You're always trying to figure out,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of histrionics in this world. And so, when you would come in, you were giving us some things that were kind of meaningless, right? Like my well-known .text and things that were kind of like breadcrumb things that didn't mean a lot. But then you were able to do some subdomain takeover stuff and things that kind of showed skill sets growing and also just your overall skill set in general. But how did you transition from that blue team world where you were hopefully trying to convince MSP customers? And I know you and Shiva have had a lot of conversations about this, but the challenge in that space is exactly that. It's convincing the others to do the things that they need to do, that they don't want to do, or that they're
Mhm.
not capable of doing. Right? We were talking about earlier before the show. Right? Let's say you have a customer that you've said, "Hey, I really want you to do these things to protect yourself," or "Hey, that software is really bad."
Yep.
Right, and trying to convince them of that and change. That's sometimes a business challenge, right? That's sometimes a thing where they will not change or they cannot change because of their line of business and verticality. But did you, during those times when you were being in that blue team hat, did you spend a lot of time trying to get homogenous like Dom and I were doing, or did you just be very selective with your customers, or did you just live the lie that we all know we live, right? In that defending our clients as an MSP, of they won't do the things necessary to protect themselves, and yet here I am trying to defend them. So where kind of in that space did you fall during that time frame?
So in the early steps of MSP, just like anybody else, you're willing to take any customer that's going to give you $1,
Yeah, man.
right? I mean, you got kids to feed, you got a house to provide for. So
Totally. Yeah.
when you're able to get to a little bit, you get to about 10, 15 clients, you start noticing a lot of trends where they're just not securing their stuff. And it actually had to get to a point where I would fire clients
Sure.
because we couldn't
And
do
this is
simple things
as
with
we
budget.
matured too, right?
Yeah.
Because this would have been as the
Mhm.
field started maturing more and more in these spaces too. I have to imagine that's combination of forces happening.
Well, I mean, mine was pretty early. So, I mean, when firing a client was unheard of, you just
Sure.
don't do that. That's money. You're losing revenue. That's not good business practice. And I didn't care. I'm like, look, if we can't at least do some sort of maintenance window at least once a week to update
Yeah.
your firewall, update your switches, update, blah, 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 you're really not, I'm not really of a value to you. So we
Right.
just started firing clients and we started pivoting. It's like, look, when you bring us on, you're going to hate me and you're going to want to choke me for about 2 or 3 weeks
Right.
because we're going to implement so much controls and so much policies and procedures onto your organization. You're going to feel like a donkey is kicking you around and around in a circle. But
Yeah.
after that, you'll be okay. But you got to know you're going to hate me for a little bit.
Well, I want to touch on something you just said there because I think that's something I give as pragmatic advice too. It's people are usually okay as long as you have the conversation,
Mhm.
right? I always, as I was starting a project, said, listen, I just want you to understand, here's the stuff I'm going to cause, here's the pain that's going to come, here's the things you're not going to like, here's the things that, and it would either bring a conversation up about those things and I'd find they're real hard non-stoppers and we might need to revisit this conversation,
Yeah.
right? Or you would have buy-in and understanding of saying, well, Matt told me this was going to suck, he didn't lie, man, this
Hmm.
sucked, right? But to your point, I think the biggest challenge is getting used to those things. I'll cite Matt Topper. Matthew Topper was my chief of security essentially when we were at Iconic, and he used to say he had draconian policies, right? But in the same breath, once you get used to those things and make sure that they line up with business objectives, and you really are not just reacting like Chicken Little, then
Yeah.
you get used to it. And I think to your point, when you implement a lot of those controls for people, they get used to it, right? And they understand it. And your goal is to always try to make it a better experience and faster, but also secure, right? And use it that
Yeah.
way. But didn't mean to stop you there. But your point
No, you're good.
was, as you transitioned, and I think we went through the same thing. You started setting standards. And you started saying, "Here's the breakers. Here's where I'm not going to be able to continue forward here." What were some of those early things for you? Was it, what was the breakers early, and then what did it transition to? Because for me, it was really low at the beginning.
It was.
uh,
So I mean, at first it was, you're going to mandate password policy, or we're going to mandate patching windows.
yeah,
I don't care if I have
100%.
to. I don't care if I have to like work all day Sunday and maybe take Wednesday off, and Wednesdays are Sunday or whatever the case is. But
Sure.
we gotta do these things without question. Um, you know, but this is long before Azure was really a thing and integrating your local environment to Azure AD. But we would put in that 10,000 password list, so you
Yeah.
couldn't use a lot of common passwords, things
Oh,
of that
you would just
nature.
use like rocku.txt or whatever, and just you
Yeah,
can't use anything in rocku. Yeah,
exactly.
fair. I love it. That's awesome.
So I mean,
Some of the vendors, I think it's QuickPass, is now making a T-shirt with rocku.txt written on it, all the little passwords. It's so good because you can see some of the passwords. You're like, yep, used that one when I was a 12-year-old.
mhm,
Yeah, it was fantastic. But so patching windows are big. In fact, it was funny. I was talking to a vendor today, and was looking at some design. It's a security product company, and they were talking about their architecture. And they were talking about, hey, when we have macro updates, do you want us to do the updates automatically? Does it need to be tied in? I said, well, it depends, right? It depends on if your update can in place replace itself in its kernel and continue running and it doesn't need a reboot. That might be a different story. But if you're talking to MSPs, they often have a lot of wrestling with their customers as to when they can patch, what times I don't want to be interrupted during, right? And they haven't quite made it to this like, I'm going to patch, damn it. I don't care if it's 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. You might be sitting in front of a presentation and you're going to I wish I had updated last night because I might update you, right? Like that's where my heart is.
Yeah.
And I think that the challenge is that you have so much legacy mindset. And I think to your point of like having to fight that fight. Thank you, Roddy. Good to see you, buddy. Having to fight that fight with your customers and get that is where that's that lie I'm talking about in this hypocrisy. And the more and more we as vendors and as partners and as MSPs start to understand what it takes to do effective security, it's more the operations. It's all of the things. It's what are my time windows between when the vulnerability is released and when I'm able to effectively patch that, let alone whether the vendor actually effectively patched it. Looking at you, Print Nightmare. But anyways, I digress. But all right,
The
so
gift that keeps
patching,
on giving.
yeah, so patching is a good one. What are some of those other inaliables? For me, it was they could not be physical. They had to be virtual servers. And I know that sounds like a kind of an abstract have to be, but if we were on prem, I wanted the ability to do HA. I wanted the ability to take a container and virtualize and move. And so if you're dealing with that physical server, one-to-one bare metal server infrastructure, it just makes it much tougher. And that was an early one for me. I mean, this would have been 2000, probably 13 or so, 2012. But, as we went on, what are some of the ones you started putting in later? I mean, everybody knows the big three-letter that people are starting to make their standard today.
But
But what
MFA finally?
that's the one I was going to say. Yeah, 100%, man. Whew. Yeah, MFA, right? But what were
Yeah.
some of those interim ones, right? For you, I
I
mean,
mean, we
I
were pretty
loved the
early
journey.
adopters of MFA. I mean, MFA wasn't around then, but making sure there was some sort of two-factor authentication that was in place on that. Um, you know, whether it was SMS or whatever the case was, right? We really tried to push for the I forget what they were called back in the day, but the uh, the dongles with the codes. I
Yeah,
don't think it
yeah.
was
Those are
Authy. That,
they were TOTPs, but they
yeah,
were dongles. They were just hard coded by RSA. Those seed
that's it.
values
RSA.
times epoch time. Yeah, they were
Yeah,
RSA tokens. Yep, yep.
yeah. I couldn't remember who was the first manufacturer. Thank you.
They
That.
were the first one to get like largely pwned too, because if anybody's familiar with TOTP, it's a time-based one-time protocol, but it's or one-time password. But what happens is you have epoch time, which is some fictitious date in midnight in 1979, and then the number of seconds since epoch time times a variable times your seed code. And so that seed code, if you expose them and can tie them one-to-one to the serial numbers of the devices, you can replicate them. And now that's Authy, right? That's the whole scan my QR code and you have Authy.
Yep.
And so interesting enough, they had thousands and thousands of them they had to mail out and replace because someone had taken their source code. This is back in like 96, 97 something. But
And if you
anyways,
want
so
a really
Brian,
interesting thing to test on, and we're not going to name any vendors on this particular one,
sure.
but um, do not store your TOTP codes in your password management tool, please.
Right. Please
I know a
God.
lot of them,
We
and
separated them. Yeah, we had the
yeah,
TOTPs in one and passwords in another system.
and test your vendor. I'm just going to say there is a vendor out there that has since patched this, but we were able to
I'll
cut.
mute you. You better not say it. I'll shut you down, son. This is not that kind of party.
I was going to leave the vendor out of it.
I understand.
All right,
You know
we'll
me.
move on. Carry on.
Anyways, so Brian, great convo. Get a starting line of what it takes to be effective in security. Yeah,
Mhm.
and I think to the point of ever raising those standards, Brian. Right? You can't keep the boat afloat with this big screen door on the side, unless you have Flex Seal.
I thought yes.
Yeah, but no, you're right. Without Flex Seal, you cannot. Right? And I think the point though is you start with a baseline. These are the things that are inalienable we must have. And I would say that you start from some subset of some kind of framework, whether it's NIST CSF, whether it's, the 55 pages in guidelines on risk-based analysis that I got to talk about with Eric beforehand from NIST. But no, the point is find CIS, find NIST, find some
Yes.
framework that gives you the ability to show here's where I am, here's what the framework needs. Here's what I'm going to keep raising my levels of standards. I've seen other MSPs do this by saying you can only be one iteration back and we iterate every year, right? So now if now my baseline is this, you can only be one iteration back of that. And that's how they kind of determine that release of clients. The other thing Matt says is cries in zebra printers.
Mhm.
Amen. Yeah, 100%. Like talk about legacy tech to support, but I digress. But yeah. But anyways, back to the conversation. Thanks, Brian, for the comment on that. That this is kind of what we're talking about is setting those standards. Oh, here we go. He says my new line after an IR. Well, I guess I'll grab some Flex Seal. Yeah, amen. True story. Yeah, you must be talking about your beard, bro.
Yeah,
But
my real long, yeah.
yeah, it's glorious. Mine will look like yours after this, though. So just to keep, I'm shaving my beard for charities,
Yeah, I mean,
and
I don't
same thing
understand
with
why
Matt.
more companies don't adopt CIS version 8 controls.
Yeah, man. They're so pragmatic. And one
Yeah.
of the things about them is they're wide enough that you can have it and iterate in that same control 10, 20 times and make it better over time. What I mean by that is let's take control one, which is have a list of all my assets that might access my enterprise resources, right?
Yep.
Great. My new way right now is whenever I buy one, I mark it down on a list and I write some stuff down about it and I try to keep an eye versus it improves now and you say, I'm going to actually take data from anything that scrapes any surface of any of our data, and those machines will be my identified assets that I'm now defining inside this policy. I automatically collect them this way. This is how they get filtered into a data. You could see how the intention of CIS, and I asked Phyllis Lee this herself, the intention of CIS is to continue iterating inside that control. Start where you are, even if it sucks. Be honest with yourself and iterate. But and to your to your stage now, you're now doing incident response predominantly, right? And that's what kind of what we wanted to kind of meander towards. And so now, what made you switch to the other side of the fence from a just providing and fighting those battles and driving those customers to be more secure to now realizing that there's an action type time frame when it's going to hit the fan and focusing mostly on incident response and on penetration testing and things that are purely in that red team services world? Like what was that transition like, and when did you start down that journey?
Uh, I wanted to be, I'm not sure the proper, I don't want to say more impactful, but I definitely, and I don't want to say like I'm being a superhero by any means, right? But
Yeah,
I
you do,
wanted,
but it's okay, I won't tell anybody.
I,
I'm teasing.
I want, it's really a fun, interesting, I don't know what really drove me to it, to
Okay.
be in DFIR, except for I knew that there's need in this space. There's a bunch of DFIR firms for very large enterprises. And I'm not taking
Yep.
away from Mandiant or Kroll
Spear tip and
or
your
any of those, right?
yeah those
Right.
players,
So
sure.
the awesome companies, they do awesome stuff, but they're more enterprise level type of thing. And there's a real void of DFI firms for small to medium sized businesses.
Sure.
So I'm like, this is something I can do. There's a huge need for it.
There's a
Why
fair
not
amount of
me?
risk, right? There's a fair amount in my mind. If you think of it for everybody, I'm starting to realize that not everybody knows the acronym. So DFIR means Digital Forensics and Incident Response is what it stands for. And it's talking
Mhm.
about this. Here's the scenario I'll set up. Your customer calls you as an MSP and says, hey, my email account was compromised and they're sending emails to all my people.
Yep.
Okay. So in the old days, we would have just dealt with it. Like I don't want to tell on myself, but we would have just changed the password and locked out the bad guy. And what the difference is now you don't know what your residual risk is. You don't know that once that actor compromised that, what all did they do? Did they egress all of my invoices and then they're now setting up a sister domain and sending communications to these people and
Mhm.
asking for wire transfers? And I have some risk. I've seen people sued over this, right? I've seen
Yeah.
that happen and play out. And so you're starting to see a world where there's risk. And as an MSP, if you're going to be the one to dig into it and hold the keys to the kingdom, you have some degree of a conflict of interest potentially, right? You have some degree of this piece. And so a lot of the times when you have an insurance claim or when you have an incident and you're insured, they're going to bring in a panel of an insurance attorney. They're going to bring in, an attorney for the breach counsel. They're going to bring in somebody on panel for the forensics response. And they're going to bring in somebody on the panel for potential negotiations if necessary as well. And I can only say that because I've lived it a few times. And
Mhm.
so, what the difference is, though, is those times when you don't necessarily know you have an insurable event, you don't necessarily have any claimants, you don't necessarily have this immediate impact. And as an MSP, you're being asked by that client, did we stop them? Did we get them out? What all did they do? And I think this is one of those points where there is a need for that service, right? And I don't want to plug you specifically, but just in the point that there's a gap of when the customer's paying for it, or even when the insurance is paying for it, but it's a much smaller event, and you want some of that proof that you did your due diligence. And I can go back to my own failure there. Is we bought an MSP, and it's actually how I got started in my career, right? It was literally, at least in the security world, it was the first day I was tapped as security director, and I wrote my giant email out that said, hey, my single biggest fear is that we're the next MSP that's Eric at ProTech and deals with the Kaseya vulnerability and blah, blah, blah. And through that, I learned that a company that had been acquired wasn't had never done the due diligence on previous incidents that they themselves had suffered, and as a result, that same threat actor kept coming back into the well. And so this is one of those things that's not really like very well served. I would agree with you, Eric. There's not a lot, but I do think that by being the guy that says I'll stand on the stand or sit, I guess it depends on the judge. Do some judges make you stand? Doesn't
No,
matter.
only
But the
when you
point
get
is,
yeah,
yeah. But the point is, you're willing to take that risk because that's what you're doing in offering this service, right? And saying that I'm
mhm,
going to follow generally accepted principles, that I'm going to have an accurate answer, right, for what I can tell out of the forensics. So that would be scary to me. I think is taking on that risk of saying I am the expert and I'm willing to say I'll argue on a stand that this is what happened against
yeah.
anybody else. Uh, Thoughts on that? Like maybe just in general, was that part of your decision tree? Is that something that you had to think about?
I mean, I did have to think about that a little bit, but it was a very short thought process. Like, can I be honorable? Yeah. Can I
Fair.
do this, with the highest integrity of the industry? Yeah. What do I do
Yeah.
to make sure that I can do that? And that's the path
Yeah.
that I went down.
Especially as you grow, right? And then you
Yeah.
add more team members and interesting to see. So have you found success in this? Because I know the answer. I'm cheating a little because you wrote me a $15,000 donation for a charity. But have you found success in the last couple of years in your journey down this response side?
Yeah. So, I mean, an interesting subset has happened. So, a lot of companies that will come to us because of an incident, they're like, we love you. We thank you so much for getting us out of this jam. How do we prevent this from happening again? And they retain, sorry,
It's okay.
the
I love dogs.
um so it sounds like the kids came out. I'll keep talking while I close the door.
You're good,
But
man.
the so they were like, well, how do we protect ourselves moving forward?
Yeah, the
So
age old question, right? Like,
yep.
and I want to reflect on this for every MSP that's here. You can get a chuckle out of this too. Is that I've never ever ever met someone after an incident that survived that didn't have the budget they swore they didn't have
Yeah.
before. Like, it really is our problem. Us not being able to explain to them the journey they're going to have to go through if they have an incident. Us not being able to explain to them the emotional impact of an event is genuinely our fault because I've never met somebody that didn't have the budget afterwards. I would imagine
Oh,
that's somewhat in your space too, Eric, for the most part.
yeah, I mean that's one side of the coin. The other one is the business owner not really seeing the value in it. It's like,
Yeah, true. That's
yeah, we,
exactly what I
we've had
mean.
this
Yeah.
discussion privately many times, but we'll talk about it publicly. It's like, if, in the manufacturing world, um, if you're got a machine that's making
Oh
tools
yeah.
for Bob Sprockets that
Yep.
costs $5 million, why is he going to now pay $15 million when his $5 million machine is still working fine?
Yep.
Right? Just because of security? No, get
I
lost.
genuinely explored. So I had a bunch of old Makinos on the floor, 5-axis Makinos on the floor at a big manufacturer, and they were looking at, instead of having drip feeding through memory sticks and storage, they
Mhm.
were thinking about doing a drip feed methodology where they were sending the serial data over serial from a controlled entity in the middle, so you don't have any of these like
Mm,
risks of USBs and things like that. And one of the challenges was the Makino was $10,000 a kilobyte for them to buy the storage they needed to get like 4 megs to have all a full program be drip fed into it during time of production. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, I was blown away that, exactly to your point, the kind of numbers to stay up. And these often have Windows XP embedded in them. They often have Windows 7 embedded in them at this stage and are rife with vulnerabilities. And so they say, we'll enclave it. But the fun part is you can only enclave it so much, and the data still has to get there, and the data still has to come from places, and it just anyway. Sorry, you got me on a rant there with the
no, you're fine.
machinists, because it is exactly what I think you face, is that the business case doesn't validate the security case in their mind. And I've genuinely had, funny enough, but I've genuinely had a manufacturer executive, their COO, look at me and say, "How long can I lie about 80171?" Genuinely,
Yeah.
not even mincing words about it, but how long can I lie about these things you're telling me I have to do to meet 80171? So that part's really, really broken. The
Until you
irony
get
is,
audited.
well, Aerojet's the answer. You and I got a new business to get into. Aerojet says that we can make 15% of whatever the DOJ sues them for on False Claims Act, which means all you and I got to do is get a real nice whistle. right? Like you and I can just get whistles and we'll just go make a bunch of money as whistleblowers. I think we're on the wrong side of the fence here, but
Yeah, I don't
uh,
want to be on that side of the fence, right? I mean,
you don't like the
that's
getting
like
killed.
Lockbit 3.0 having their own bug bounty program.
Oh,
That's
dude, I'm going to
really
be talking about that on my show on Friday. The bug bounty program is so hilarious. Like the whole
crazy.
concept of it, of docs for free, and oh my goodness gracious. But you know, to Brian's point, right? It is a storytelling problem before a breach, and you and I talked about this before the show, so I think it's good a time to talk about it and maybe get some ideas from the crowd listening. But I'm thinking about putting together a tabletop exercise with Huntress for a event coming up that Paco LeBron's putting on. And the way I want to do this is I'm going to gather tables of 5 or 6 people, and they're going to sit and hold roles. Each person is going to be the technician, a service manager, an owner of the MSP, an angry customer will be represented at the table. And I want to take people through a ransomware journey as an MSP of what it feels like, what the chaos is like, the way the story unfolds, the craziness that comes about it, right? That it starts with this one call from a customer saying, I can't access my EMR. And then it eventually turns into every customer's calling, everybody's down, you're now in panic mode, you're canceling plans, you canceled lunch. And the whole time we're in this tabletop, one person's responsibility is to keep asking for the owner. Hey, I want to talk here. I want to talk. Where's my system? When's it going to come up? So that as they're having that conversation, they're interrupted in the same manner they would be interrupted in that world, right? And so, going to be putting together something cool. Try to get that to where it's more usable. Maybe nowhere near as cool as a backdoors and breaches card deck. I'm not that awesome, but try to put together something so that MSPs can walk away, but then also take customers through that journey. Walk them through what a ransomware event looks like. Have their people that represent their stakeholders, their accounting team, say, here's what I need to do in the next week. You just interview them ahead of time. What all do you have to get done this week? Great. Now, have your event collapse those capabilities and speak towards those capabilities and make it real. And if you take someone through that journey and say, okay, what are the solutions here? You can get some portion of an inoculation. It's not meant to be fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's meant to be a dip in reality of what it would be like if you go down that path. And everybody tries to trivialize it as, well, it's just an event. But Eric, I don't know if you've been like me, but I've cried. I've seen people cry. I've been there as people were devastated in their world. And when you get to experience that, you just feel significantly more convinced in what you're saying to them. Right? Like,
Yeah, so I mean, we've had cases even as of this week where people feel like it's their world is crumbling down on them. You know, we've had in the past month 2 cases where folks are saying they feel like they're about to have a heart attack.
yeah. Well,
You
I've
know,
got a
this is
great question for you because this one I'm going to see how you react. And you can't have read it yet. Don't read it yet, but I'm going to pop this up here because I want the real raw Eric answer. Once a CFO asked me to hide a baby monitor in the room used by auditors. How would you handle this one?
I'm not sure the words that I'm allowed to say are allowed on this podcast. If you
Yeah,
can,
yeah, fair. Mine would include almost a broken hand. I've got to be honest with you. What it tells me instantly is that CFO does not understand the purpose of what you're trying to do and is clearly trying to check a box. And I think that's the point is checking a box training doesn't work. Simply lowering the standards of a boot camp to get more soldiers on the field did not translate to better soldier adoption, right? It just simply translated to more dead soldiers. And I think the point is that if you're taking an audit to the point where in your mind your job is to try to figure out what they want and anticipate and be, cheat and play the game, then you're clearly just trying as an executive to check the damn box. And I think Cyber Insight Canada probably said this to just to pull my damn chain. But in reality, I totally would be just disgusted by that, and it would tell me that I might be in the wrong place.
oh, Cyber Insight Canada
Personally.
maybe trying to trigger me because I think they know that I get kind of triggered. But I mean, if you want a good idea of what I would do about how much I would get into their face and tell them how stupid they are, just YouTube drill instructors Paris Island and watch what they do. And imagine me doing that to some C-level person because that's about what would happen
Yeah, all
with a lot of
seriousness though,
explicitness.
you do absolutely have to educate in that and help explain that this is a business function. It's here for a reason, and it is to reduce real risk. I think that's the challenge we have here, right? Good to see you back, risk, since you are the definition of most of the things I talk about every day is risk. So, yeah, glad to have you here, brother. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Back to that conversation of who your clients are. So, what is take me through. I've seen you already did this with Jerry Auger, a day through an incident responder's life. But who are the people you're serving? Is it mostly MSP constituencies and their clients? Is it a lot of just direct business? Where do you find yourself right now?
It's direct business. So a lot of MSPs are really, really scared to reach out to us. And when they do, they're really pushed back because they don't want to answer a lot of questions, right?
Mm,
And MSPs need to understand we're not there to name and shame them.
right.
There's plenty of time to do naming and shaming and all this other crap later, right? If
Not on
that's
my
where,
show. Not on
yeah,
my show
no,
though,
show.
right? Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's if
We
someone was
tangentially
agreed,
shame.
yeah, I mean, if someone was just obviously egregious in what they were doing, like the MSP openly left RDP open, it's going to come
Yeah.
out in the forensics reports.
Yep.
But it's not. We're not there to make people look bad. But our
Right.
agreements are with the clients.
Yeah.
So
I think your challenge there is actually quite succinct and part of this whole challenge anyway. It is that we all know that we're living a lie. Whether that's because the clients haven't done the things that are necessary or engaged in their own security, or that's because we can't convince them and can't go that path, or it's whether we're not secure ourselves and we aren't making those decisions. It's some mix of all three of those at all times. And I think what we live with, and I think the biggest takeaway from this is have some humility, have some
yeah,
transparency, live in a world where you understand your limitations and where you are, and try to drive past that. And that goes to everybody. That's vendors, that's me, that's you, that's
hmm
all of us living in this world of we are starting to realize what enterprise has known for 15 years and still hasn't solved. But that cybersecurity is a massive challenge to the economy of the United States and the Five Eyes communities and really everybody globally. And if we don't solve some of these things and deal with them, then we're not going to have the same world. And so why would you start by putting on airs and lying about where you are? Why would you start by being, so we don't need to do forensics because we don't want anybody to find out we messed up. Now, granted, risk and management and damage control still play out even after the boom, right? And so I can understand where the drive is, but if you're sitting here today and listening to this, my advocation would be to start doing the things to build defensibility now, being transparent about where you are, where your controls are, and where they need to improve, and then iterating on them. And what you'll build is, even when it turns out there is a failure on your side, you'll be able to explain why a reasonable person would find you not at fault, right? Where you have iterated through, you've documented talking to the clients, you've said to them, hey, this particular product still contains Chrome 57 binaries. There's 3,500 attacks that can be done against this. This is a risk. And you document that. And when they say no, and I'm not going to move forward, you have to make your point back to this original baseline that Wheeler and I were talking about is where's that line? When they cannot or will not, where's that line? Where do I draw that line? And you'll want to improve that line over time. You'll want to
yeah. I mean,
raise
there is
that.
a real line of security must eat productivity.
Yeah, true story.
Uh, I mean,
Yeah,
you
has
can't.
to.
Yeah, you can't just put such an airtight gap on a business that it takes them 5 times longer to do the same task.
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit longer, okay, but you don't want to
And
cripple the business at the same time.
and where you can improve it, right? Like when I went to that CSA event that kind of sparked my idea of how to do this tabletop was it was put on by Starbucks. Starbucks did the tabletop injections for us at the CSA executive thing, and ultimately he talked about his story of when I came on and I wanted to do passwordless. I wanted to go to all FIDO tokens for my baristas. I wanted to go to where I could have people that were in that frontline worker using a passwordless methodology instead of a password to be captured. Okay, great. I like it. He could not win on the security arguments to the board at all. It was won on when that barista walks up and types in their code and presses the button once on their thing. It's on average 20 to 30 seconds faster than hands on keyboard typing a password in an MFA path, right? And so the argument was we can serve coffee faster. So sometimes with security, you actually can get a win and
Yeah.
a win in that space. And hopefully they all balance out, right, to a certain point. But what that takes, though, and Brian Wheeler, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this if you're still with us, but what that takes, though, is real deep collaboration and sometimes explanation to those client partners and trying to get them on board to understand that this is how they're going to be better as a business, not just more secure. This is how we're going to actually improve your technology too.
hmm
Right in that same breath, but little tangential Wheeler pop in if you get a chance on chat. But so Eric, on you're serving a lot of direct clients. What would you say that average size is that you're finding? Is it the 25, 30, 40 customers, or is it vary drastically?
It does vary drastically. I mean, we do have some that are in the 5 to 25 end user range, but most of them are anywhere between, I'd probably say, 150 to 500.
Okay. So a lot of the mid-market space that is
hmm
truly underserved as well. And also can sometimes have more of a loose affiliation with their MSP and more of a co-managed model or things in that space as well.
Yeah.
if now that you've been doing this for, I think you've been doing it professionally now for a few years as
Mhm.
your primary business.
Yep.
If you could go back as former Eric the MSP, what's one thing you've learned from this now that you would take back and make a change as a baseline have to haves for those partners? Like what's one Papa Eric advice around making your incident response better by having X done ahead of time, right? What's your thought there?
I would think do not formulate a solid stack and don't ever deviate from it. Like
Okay.
you have your firewall, you have your switches, you have your APs, you have a minimum OS,
Yeah.
you have minimum MFA, minimum
I bet a lot of people miss
VLANs.
that minimum OS. Like it must be 10H2 or better, or it must be right. Like having that delineable like line in the sand. I love that advice.
VLANs are set up the same across
Yep.
all the locations, whatever the case is. Um, and making sure that everything is MFA'd as much as possible. I mean,
Amen. Yeah.
and if you don't have you going in and you're getting a new one, it's like, well, I got this Sonic wall that's still got 6 months still
Yep.
left. I don't give a freaking crap. We're doing a
Yeah, it's
rip and
that
replace.
sunk cost fallacy, right? Like that's
Hmm.
the mentality there, and it's not understanding the ability to deliver security at scale. So I'll take my poke at mine. You tell me what your thoughts are.
Okay.
I think that one of the biggest missing pieces for MSPs today that would impact their overall incident response is actually having a freaking incident response plan. Actually writing down, here's what my goals are, here's the people involved, here's where I escalate, here's my next step. And having that and living that is one of the biggest gaps right now because so many people focus on protect, having all the tools, making sure they're right, which is still critical, but not as much on detect, respond, and recover and focusing on that. And I think that's where your space is. And I think having the tools, agreed, huge, gives you all the things so you know exactly what you can do in those environments, what should have been there, what shouldn't have been there, knowing that they're all the same, that they're ran the same with the same processes. But having an incident response plan, I think, is also one of those critical ones that most people don't have in my audience today.
Let's talk about how to
Uh,
start one. This is gonna be a little bit of story time, but let's go down this rabbit hole for a second. I got a client even to this day um, that really taught me something early on that not all data is considered the same. And we'll talk
Amen.
about this. Let's say you have a fire at your house. I run up to you and say, "What do you need?" "I need my stuff out of my house." I'm going in, I'm grabbing your kitchen table, I'm grabbing your kitchen table
Yeah.
chairs, I'm
But
grabbing
if
the
you had
fixtures.
said, I need my cat and my child, there would be a
Exactly.
hierarchy and both would be on the list. It would be child then cat, probably. And
Yep.
you're a
So when
sick
you're
human for
looking
saying
at
cat first.
you're
But
talking to a client and said, "Okay, what is the most impactful piece of technology inside of your organization?" Maybe
right.
it's SAP, QuickBooks, whatever the
Yeah. A
case is.
business impact analysis methodology, right? Like what
Yeah.
is the most critical piece of your world?
And,
Yep.
that's what you're doing. You're building that out. So, like, if a flood, a hurricane, or whatever, as your document, you have it documented. I've got to get this server up. Nothing else runs until I get this
Well,
one.
see, and you took this down into the tactical, right? Per client. I agree with that too.
Yep.
First, it starts with what am I going to do from a plan, but then it's what do each of these are going to do for a plan, and how would that get
Mhm.
executed is brilliant. Well, we're
Yep. So
running out
as
of
you're building,
time. We
okay.
don't. We only get. I know this goes by so dang quick, and I apologize, Eric, but we ride up at 45 minutes, and you and I can get chatting. So I do want to add in that we have established Gandalf baselines. You shall not pass. Reed Wheeler, love you,
What's
bro.
that a reference to? Sounds like Game of Thrones or something.
It definitely sounds very much more like the Lord of the Rings, but I'm with
Ah,
you on it. Yeah, yeah. But the point being, Eric, we may have a follow up to this. We had a huge actual audience this whole time, it seems. So it's been a really good show and a lot of good questions. But short story is, as a takeaway for MSPs, one last thought to leave with them. What should they be doing? I know I keep putting you on the spot for all this sage advice, but give us one last thought for MSPs that you would love to tell them before the breach.
look at your own internal assets and knowledge base of you and your internal team. If you truly don't know something, seek people you can trust to give you the answers. I
Yeah.
mean, it doesn't have to be barricade cyber. It could be
Vis-a-vis the
literally,
stack, configuration,
oh, not just that.
approach,
I mean,
methodologies.
how do I
Yeah.
implement this? What's the best way of doing this? Find a good resource that you can ask
Yeah, man.
questions on.
Love it. And poke holes and ask questions and challenge everybody to be better. right? And be better yourself and find ways to be humble and take those failures you had before, own them, and move forward and get better. I think that is every human's aspiration, as well as a security human. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate y'all.